Check it. This was good. Another day on the grind. Just wanted to go in real quick and expand on some things. I was going to open with saying what date it was, and then I began to think about time. And time, is simply a period of observation. The way that we measure time in so-called Western society, basically post-crusade territory, conquered territory, colonized territory, is according to the Gregorian calendar. And, of course, throughout history, years have been changed, dates have been changed, by quote-unquote officials, those who are deemed to be in power. And still, honestly, to this day, the most influential organization is the Catholic Church. So everyone still operates by their standard of time, based on the manner in which they spread like a plague throughout the planet. Conquering indigenous people, moving in with religions and quote-unquote medicines and trinkets, supposed benefits of being connected to a world market. These are some of the things that baited us into dealings with Europeans. So, but to talk about time for a minute, if we examine what time actually is, we should be able to understand that it's a fallacy in itself. The modern time, 24-hour clock and 12-month year of Western society is not that of indigenous cultures, because the moon cycle is actually 28 days, so therefore it's 13 months in a year, each one with 28 days, but with this jumbled mess of a calendar, the whole point and purpose is to get you to honor and reverence the deities in which they worship, the deities in which they believe give them power, and get the entire planet operating on their frequency. And of course there's always a profit motive, but the profit is not the aim and the goal. These people are in league with wicked spirits. These people are in league with energies and entities, that operate on a destructive frequency to the planet. That's why you see so much death and destruction with the more power that they gain. So, really, when we begin to talk about time, we have to start at saying that the time that we think we know is not what truly is. Of course, we try and say at set a point in fictitious history that we've been told about, and say, okay, well, chemists started 15,000 years ago, so today is not 2015, it's actually 15,015. I mean, we can make up all type of things, and some people do have an uninterrupted concept of time. Some bloodlines do trace their lineage back in terms of the creation of their people, and it's all relative to position within the universe, and position meaning basically where your people say you started and where you are now. So it's a distance over observation. So as soon as we started paying attention and said, okay, let's start paying attention today, let's start cataloging things today, at that point is when time begins. Otherwise, you're just in a state of existence. And when people delve into the realm of deep meditative thought, you might take mushrooms, other supplements, traditional medicines, things of that nature. But the first thing that dissipates is the concept of time and the pressure and weight that we feel by being bound by time. You know, the time, you know, people say color people time, and, you know, CB time and African time, you know, all, you know, Jamaican time, island time, you know, all type of measurements of time to try and say that, you know, we're behind, we run slow, or we move at a different pace, you know. But what it really is we have a natural flow. We have a natural cycle. And what we're trying to do, we've been placed in a position where we have to operate by someone else's concept of time, someone else's pace, someone else's rate of speed, someone else is dictating to us what time is. We're not determining time based on the moon cycle. We're not determining time based on the sun cycle, because if we were, there would be no such thing as daylight savings time. You know, there would be no such thing as a 30-month, 31-day month, 30-day month. You know, like these things wouldn't exist. Everything would be a set standard. You know, it would be consistent with the cycle of whatever it is that we observe. You know, so when we say things are, you know, like in the Christian pantheon, like growing up, I would hear a lot of, you know, God may not come when you want him to, but he's always right on time, right? You know, and that is like an inference to saying that the Creator's time is not bound by our period of observation. We cannot sit and say, I need to get this done by the third moon cycle, and if it doesn't happen by the third moon cycle, all things are going to fall apart in my life, and I'm not going to be able to do this. This is, you know, this is where we have to elevate and expand beyond our comprehension and stop using our physical eyes, because the spiritual world has its own ebb and flow. It has its own sequence of events. It has its own series of actions. And the series of actions is what we catalog as being a timeline or a history or a story or whatever we may refer to it as. You know, a legend, anthology, you know. All these things become mythology because we place them within a specific period of observation, and the majority of which is in the past. Very rarely do you hear elders tell stories of things to come. You know, we've lost a lot of our visionaries. So most of what we hear from our elders are stories of things past. You know, some things are of how good things were, you know, during a specific period of time, you know, in terms of how we supported one another, how we had our own businesses, how we worked together, how we kept track of each other's children, kept each other's children in line, you know, things of this nature. But, you know, or we also have, you know, where, you know, we say, oh, well, now things are so much better because you get to go to the quote-unquote good schools, you know, basically where white folks go. You know, you get to go into a restaurant anywhere. Like, you can stop at any rest stop or any town or any city and it'd be all good. You know, and not have to worry about watching out for the lynching party, not have to watch out for the lynching gang, you know. And some of this is true, you know, but some of it is false. You know, but it's all based on that person's observation, that person's perspective. You know, and when we talk about perspective, we're talking about your relative position to a thing as you observe it. So let's say that we have a cube, a three-dimensional cube. You know, it has length, width, and depth. You know, 3 dimensions. So as we observe this thing based on our position, it may appear to be the same. But when you transition to something that is less standardized, because square is equal on all sides and the cube is equal on all sides, which is a three-dimensional square. So when we expand this into something like let's say a triangle or a pyramid in 3 dimensions, so we have a pyramid or a prism, and we observe that the observation will vary based on position. You will not always see the same perspective, and this is important because it shows us how we can transition from standing over something to standing under something to being on the side. And every single one of us are true. Like, our perspective is true. Our perspective of a thing is true, but we're all in different positions. So we don't know the whole of the thing. And in order to know the whole of the thing, the only way you can really engage with that, since you can't be on all sides at all times, is to communicate with other energies, communicate with other people that hold different positions, that stand in different positions based on observation or observing the object. Okay, so an object, it's easy to think in terms of shapes, but when we think of an object in terms of a life cycle, or we think in an object in terms of a people, so let's say the Hebrew people, that's an object, even though it's reality, even though it is, a realistic people that exists at a specific period of time, it becomes an object when we observe it. So the whole thing about objectification is to remove oneself. So when we say that we are something but we're outside of it, or we say that I'm studying history or I'm studying man, what you actually do is remove yourself from being in that category of man, and you observe man's actions based on a different perspective. You attempt to base, your determinations on a different perspective, but at the same time, you cannot truly remove yourself and be totally objective because you're still connected. In the act of observing time, what it does, it disconnects you from action. So when we say, okay, from this time to this time, I want to do this. That's action within a period of observation. But if we say, I'm going to sit and watch, and I'm going to wait for this to occur before I act, you've removed yourself from the place of generation. And a lot of times, what we do, we transition from living, acting, impacting upon our environment, and having our presence being felt, and making our mark like we're supposed to. We move away from that and we move into a realm of non-interaction, in a realm of a position where we allow ourselves to be stagnant. And stagnant energy, latent energy, there's no such thing as dead energy, but it's a energetic state of stasis, where you're almost frozen in quote unquote time, where your actions are not being are not really beneficial to you. They're not really beneficial to the universe. So this is where we get into the state of, relying upon a savior. A lot of people are using drugs. A lot of people are using money, alcohol, food, religion as saviors. When we say savior, typically we think about Christianity. We start thinking about, The one they call Jesus, and the dominated images of white skin and purity and all this other stuff that they want us to believe. But when we think about a savior is really something that does for you what you don't want to do for yourself, or you don't think you're powerful enough to do for yourself. And that's pretty deep science, because who is it that says that you can't do a thing? Who is it that says that you can't accomplish your goals? See, this is what happens. Like, when we get caught up in somebody else's time, what we become is detached from our own story. Our own object of who it is that we are. So we look at our people as being an object, and we detach and disassociate. We totally detach. Like, so now there are many people here in the Americas that come from the Americas, right? But because we read books, because we go to schools, funded, taught by our enemies, we adopt certain principles, we adopt certain perspectives, we adopt certain understandings based on what we've been told, not by our own people but by others that we deem to be more intelligent than our own people. Because that's the whole way. Like, the whole Western way is to get people to think that whatever you have is not good enough, and that whatever you gain will make everything all right in your life. That's the Western mind control program. It's very simple, it's very basic, but it's so expansive because it reaches into every aspect of your life. It reaches into every aspect of every single thing you interact with in this world. Because many people, especially after the violence of the Crusaders and the Grand Inquisition and quote unquote exploration, or invasion of all other parts of the world, outside of Rome and outside of Europe. Like, after basically having our legs chopped out from under us, disconnecting us from our roots, we've been planted in new soil. Essentially the tree's roots have been cut off, and we've been planted in new soil, and we're desperately trying to reach out and expand. And we reach out in manners in which, we try and reconnect with people all over the world now. Because we have people all over the world that are available to us, that we can interact with on a daily basis. So when we reach out in the spirit of brotherhood, the spirit of peace, the spirit of trying to gain knowledge, So we reach out to our African brothers, because, some of us were brought here from Africa, some of us voluntarily came here from Africa, some of us explored the Americas before Europeans even spoke, so, that's what it is. But it's all different perspectives of the same object. And the reason why it's the same object is because we've been removed from our own story. So these people can profit, these people can manipulate, these people can push and pull us in a manner that pushes us into self-destructive behaviors. And these self-destructive behaviors always have a time associated to them or attached to it. They always have a time. So, like if you are an alcoholic, it's the amount of alcohol you consume over a period of observation. So if you drink 10 bottles of Jack Daniels in a year, according to the Gregorian calendar, you're not an alcoholic. But if you drink 10 bottles of Jack Daniels in a day and a half, then you're an alcoholic, based on the frequency in which you consume. So understanding what frequency is, which is just a cycle of time, from peak to peak, in order to make a full revolution, when you basically put it in a two-dimensional format, you remove it from being a circle and it becomes a sinusoidal wave form. So when you observe that, you observe it from peak to peak, and that's one cycle, and the frequency is basically the inverse of that. So, but regardless of that, like, as we observe and say, okay, enslavement period, when we say the period of rebuilding, the periods before, if you start your cycle at the third revolution, or you start your cycle at the 34th revolution, you miss 34 revolutions of your cycle. So 34 revolutions of your story has become objectified. And when it becomes objectified, that means that you only hold a certain perspective. You only view it from a certain viewpoint. So we can only look back on slavery now and observe it as something that we're told that it was. We can't see it as sharecropping. We can't see it as basically being tricked. Like, we can't see it as any of that. We can only see what we've been told in Roots and other bullshit type stories, that were primarily made by white folks, who have a vested interest in keeping us in that perpetual state of objectification, of observing something that may not have even existed as it is presented to us. We may be looking at a conical sphere from below, and it appears to be a circle. So we appear to think that we know the whole of it, but we don't know the whole of it because we don't see all sides. And that's why we reach out to our ancestors. That's why we reach out to our elders, because we get different perspectives of the same story, of the same object, without actually detaching ourselves. We can be inside and outside at the same time. We can have knowledge and wisdom be fed to us from inside or within and without at the same time. Internal and external, because it's all about balance. If you understand anything about time, it's all about balance and it's all about consistency. But if you observe the Europeans or the Western time cycle, it's imbalanced, it's incomplete. That's why when you get into networking, clock servers are constantly reset. And the higher up you move, in the food chain, the more frequently they're reset. So you're not operating according to what you think you're operating according to. You're not operating according to the sun cycle. You're not operating according to the moon cycle. You're not operating according to anything but what somebody else tells you you're operating according to. And they can try and use a justification and say, oh, it's because of the stock market, the reason why we work 8 to 5 and all this other. No, that's bullshit. That's total bullshit. Because if that was the case, there would be no such thing as, California operating on a different time. There would be no such thing. So it's incomplete and it's only halfway. And that's the whole thing. The way to keep somebody confused is to only tell half truths. Because part of the truth is not the whole of the truth. It's still truth, but it's incomplete. And that's my whole thing. You can mix incomplete truth with lies and make it seem like it's all good. You can mix incomplete truths with all manner of things, and confuse the people. And we've been perpetually confused because we've allowed other people to tell us our story. We've allowed other people that we don't truly even understand to say who we are. And I'm not saying just Europeans. I'm talking about, when I say Europeans, I'm not talking about complexion. I'm not talking about white-skinned people or pink-skinned people. I'm not talking about them. I'm talking about those that came over here from Europe. You know, dark skin, light skin, white skin, whatever. You know, those that came over here from Europe and have a vested interest in exploiting our people. You know, because they don't come from shit. And our land does not feed them like our land feeds us. Our land is right now feeding the majority of the planet. Literally feeding. You know, Africa is providing the mineral riches and the mineral wealth for the majority of the planet. But in terms of food, that's coming from the Americas. You know, because we're deeper in this game, so to speak. We're deeper in, like they've been here longer. They invaded our lands earlier. You know, we interacted with them sooner. You know, in terms of exploitation and European parasitic expansion. You know, living alongside and interacting in trade and things like that, and warfare like that occurred in Northern Africa and you know, in areas like that, in Europe and areas like that. But just speaking in terms of the Americas, you know, and how we allowed them to come over here and set up shop, that's been going on longer. You know, but I say all that to say this. As we move through our observation of events, of what it is that we've done, what it is that we want to do, what it is that we aim to be, what story it is that we want to be told. We have to break out of their time cycle. We have to break out of their light code. We have to break out of their light cycle, because all of these things are chains that bind us. All of these things are chains that bind our consciousness. All of these things are chains that bind and prevent us from expansion. That's the whole point of binding anything, is to prevent expansion, or to hold it together or press it down so that you can use it how you see fit. See, dynamic energy, self-generative energy, does not need a savior. Self-generators do not need food dependencies. Self-generators do not have drug dependencies. Self-generators, you know, these are those that are modeled, that follow the way of the Creator. The way of the Creator is to constantly create. So when you constantly create, you're operating on a dynamic frequency, a dynamic plane of energy, which cannot be put into a box or a cube, which cannot appear to be the same thing on all sides, from all perspectives. You know, and that's the biggest thing. That's the biggest thing. When you look at a three-dimensional shape like a cube and put it in a two-dimensional plane view, no matter where you are, you're going to observe it as some form of a square. And that's what the whole deception is. Like we're operating on a third-dimensional reality, which is a lower vibrational realm, and our focus is being further constricted, further dumbed down to almost a two-dimensional way of thinking. What goes up must come down. That's two-dimensional thought. That's not even third-dimensional thought, because we're not even factoring in angles. You're just saying up and down. What goes up must come down. What? Why? Why is that? So that's not the complexity of it. That's not the complexity. So when we talk about gravitational quote-unquote law, it's incomplete. It's totally incomplete. It's totally not what it represents itself to be. And that's the whole point. To get us to operate according to laws that are not truly real, that do not truly encapsulate the principles that control and manipulate and dictate the environment and the world around us, and the universe around us. And if someone can do that, they can take your power away. If you have a natural ability to control water, but you don't understand the science of surface tension, you will think that you can jump off of the Empire State Building or the Sears Tower and dive into a body of water, dive into an ocean, a lake, a stream, whatever, and hit that water and not be damaged, not be harmed. That's not reality. That's not reality. That is not the true and the whole of the law. The whole of the law must be observed properly. It must be interacted with. The whole of the law. The partial of the law enslaves you. See, that's why their law books, are not, they're not laws. These are just principles and codes, that they established. They're nothing more than rules written in a handbook. And because you sign that the back of that handbook saying that you've read this handbook, you're bound to those principles now. You're bound to those codes, to those rules that they say dictate this reality, which truly don't dictate this reality. They tell you that you can't fly without a machine. But have you tried? But have you tried to understand the deep science of flying? No, we haven't. And you know why? Because we don't understand time. The most basic, fundamental, foundational element of our existence here in the physical is to be bound by time. And we don't understand it. We don't overstand it. We don't sidestand it. We don't understand it. None of that. We're operating with one eye open, blindfolded. And that's the best way. That's the best analogy to explain what it is that we're doing here. We're stumbling around in the dark, disconnected from ancestral traditions, disconnected from our own culture, disconnected from our own speech, our own language, our own songs, our own dances, but without any desire whatsoever to recover any of that. We feel the loss. We feel the objectification. We feel that we're outside of ourselves, observing ourselves through someone else's eyes. And when we allow ourselves to observe ourselves outside of ourselves, and use things like the television to basically observe who it is that our enemy says that we are. Not even who it is that they really know that we are. Not who it is that they actually see. None of that. But who it is that they tell us we are. Who it is that they are strategically telling us who we are. And we're using their concept, their perspective, their eyes. And they're already blind. They are already blinded. And disconnected. So they observe real naturally connected things as objects. They don't feel the connection to a tree. They don't feel the connection to earth. I don't care how many videos and pictures they post of them hugging trees and digging ditches and planting plants and all the other shit. Yeah, whatever. Because at the same time,